Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that always try to dig a little bit deeper. And we are closing out our 70th series of episodes, as we always do with our Sound Off, our freeform segment. It's the 54th time we've done this, episode 70.4. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. And you might see I'm in somewhat unfamiliar surroundings. I'm in Newtown, Pennsylvania for the first time since 2020. We did a couple episodes here, episode 60.360. When Matt Polis, Alex, and I reviewed the film North by Northwest, and also episode 60.4, the episode right after that, where we counted down the top 5 films from 1959. Very similar episode to this one, which basically is a follow-up in a lot of our finale episodes. That's what we use the sound off for, sort of things we didn't cover in previous episodes, sort of more casual in that way. And I've got a couple of co-hosts that are going to join me for tonight. First, one of our newest members doing her very first sound off. Ladies and gentlemen, Melanie Rich-Ho is here.
Hello.
And also with us, ladies and gentlemen, one of the members from our 1986 in review is going to dig into those films again with me right now. He's hiding. Max Fano the Enigma is here.
Hello, hello.
We caught you in the middle of a book, Max.
Yes, right in the middle. I only start in the middle.
Well, that's what makes you enigmatic. Just want to tell the audience that this has been our 70th series episode. So here's the schedule of what we've just done. It started a couple Thursdays ago with the review of our current feature, and continued last Monday with our indie spotlight, the film Brigsby Bear from 2017. This past Thursday was our classic movie discussion that Mel was a part of. The film Howard the Duck, also from 1986. And tonight, of course, is the sound off, and there you see just some of the things that we've got coming for you tonight. So we do this every once in a while. It's time for a book review. Tonight we review this book called Powerhouse, about the creation, rise, and shifts of the Creative Artists Agency, simply known to us in the industry as CAA. It is an oral history from writer James Andrew Miller, who also did oral histories on Saturday Night Live in a book called Live from New York, and also ESPN in a book called Those Guys Have All the Fun. For those of you who don't know, oral histories are essentially interviews, but extensive ones that are cut and paste to tell the story chronologically. For example, you would hear from one person about the starting of the agency, and then someone else would have a quote about the same thing from their own words. There's no prose or writing, all quotes to sort of build the narrative. Have you guys ever read a book like this in the past?
Mm-hmm.
I've just written books like this, but only. I've never read them.
Yeah.
It sounds like an interesting exercise in editing.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I actually have read both of those other books from the same guy that does these oral histories. A little bit of context about the story itself about CAA before I talk about the book itself. For those of you who don't know, CAA was started by 5 disgruntled William Morris agents who were frustrated with their growth potential at that agency. They were Mike Rosenfeld, Bill Haber, Roland Perkins, Ron Meyer. Max, you know the last one?
Mr. Huvane?
No, he was way later. Michael Ovitz. It was
Oh.
really all about 2 of these 5. Michael Ovitz and Ron Meyer, one of the most successful good cop, bad cop tandems in any industry ever. Book details how they grew the business, their methods, their successes, and their excesses. It shows how they achieved success because Ron Meyer was beloved and Michael Ovitz was feared. I would even make the argument that between 1982 and 1995, Michael Ovitz was the most powerful single man in Hollywood history. Even during the days of the moguls, power was shared in an oligopoly. Ron Meyer was famous for being a dogged ally to his clients. All of his clients loved him, but Ron Meyer was never power hungry in the same way Michael Ovitz was. Ovitz wanted the world, and for a time, he kind of had it. There are many stories to illustrate this, but my favorite is this one. Ovitz was a nut about Eastern philosophy and fitness, so he would get up at 6 a.m. every morning for daily Aikido training with the same instructor every day. He was so happy with his instructor, he decided he was going to make this instructor a movie star, even though this person had 0 acting experience. Max, who was that Aikido teacher?
Steven Seagal?
Steven Seagal is correct. Ovitz single-handedly made Seagal a star, partially because so many movie studios not only feared him, but kind of owed him. And that's just one of many, many stories that Powerhouse has to share. As far as the book is concerned, I admit I love this oral history format. And I think it might especially appeal to Max, although I'm sure he doesn't approve of CA or agencies in general. But the book itself, I think it would appeal to you because it allows you to come to your own conclusions. There's no sort of contextualizing. A lot of nonfiction writers will color your views in one direction or another. To sort of paraphrase the thing that Max talks about when he looks at films, you work harder in this book because you're coming to your own conclusions. James Andrew Miller includes quotes from different people that contradict each other. There's several instances in this book where one agent will take credit for something, and then he'll cut to another quote where another agent will take credit for the same thing and say that it was him. I always find that kind of fascinating.
I just find that any agent taking credit for anything is shocking.
Shocked to find there's gambling in this establishment. Mel, that's a quote from Casablanca, just so you know. But CAA is still the biggest and the strongest, but not as dominant in the marketplace as they once were. The other agencies learned from many of CAA's methodologies and caught up a little. Still, the entrepreneurial spirit in the beginning, the story of their teamwork and preparation, but also the hubris and arrogance makes for a fascinating read, especially for someone like me who works and lives in the industry. It's a definite recommend to me. I love all his books. I recommend all his books, probably the ESPN one above all. Max, what do you think? Are you interested in this book, Powerhouse?
Yeah, sounds like an exciting read.
Mel, what do you think?
I am much more of a fiction reader than a nonfiction. I don't know. I guess I'm curious about that format. It's hard for me to think I would find it interesting, but maybe.
You're having a great time in the sound off.
Talk at me.
What I do. In this next segment, which is a fan favorite, especially this time of year when we go over the finales, it's time for Tweet Beat. The Tweet Beat is when you guys send us questions on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Most feedback that we get is regarding the finale episodes. When I say finale episodes, I talk about our top 10 films of 2021, our Oscar preview of 2021, and our 1986 in review, which Max, of course, was a part of. First thing I always do is we share our composite top 10. And what that is, the three guys that run the top 10, Matt, Patrick, and I, if you combined our top 10s, this is what you would get. Each film has a point value in our top 10s. If it's our number one film, it gets 10 points. Number two film gets 9 and all the way down. So if you combined all those points, this is what you would come up with. And of course, for the second time ever, one film appeared on all three lists, and that was Dune. So that's why it's in there at number one. The only other film to accomplish that on our show history is Phantom Thread in 2017, which was on all three top 10s. 4 films on this composite list made my top 10. Matt and Patrick had 4 films cross over on each other's list. I had one additional crossover with Matt P. and no others with Patrick outside of Dune. Only 3 Best Picture nominees on this list, including the winner in there at number 5. What do you guys think here about this list?
I am ashamed to admit I've only seen 3 of these movies. Dune, Coda, and
Power of the Dog.
Power of the Dog, sorry, yeah.
You just watched the Best Picture nominees and went on with your life. See, now you've got some movie recommendations.
I do,
yes. To look at.
I guess it makes sense you guys all had Dune on your list.
Because we're boys? Is that where you're heading with that?
No. No, I mean, it was like very impressive. I have like a lot of story issues with Dune. But it's one of those things you're like, it is what it is. It's like from the book, it's like a chapter, you know.
I mean, you only have story issues because it's only half a movie. Like, I feel like when you'll be fine. You didn't watch our top 10.
I did. I kind of like scrubbed through, so I didn't hear every comment. I wanted to see like what everyone's movies were, and I did see that. So
okay. So what did you think about based on that?
I was very surprised at your number one, but I really want to see it because actually I've heard really good things about it.
But I mean, I tried to defend it.
Yeah, no, I very much want to watch that movie now.
Max, did you see our top 10 films?
I didn't see that, and I'm just like mortified by the fact that I didn't see any of anything.
To be fair, you were knee deep in 1986.
I was knee deep in 1986.
So you've not seen any of these films on this composite top 10?
No need to bring in the Nazis. I haven't seen any of these, and it's terrifying me. I'm gonna get moving on it.
What's gonna be your first one?
What's gonna be? I mean, the winner, Coda, it sort of strikes me as a movie to see. I think I have a screener, which is really embarrassing that I even have access to some of these and I haven't seen them.
Can I just say though, I mean, like, I know you, and given that all that we talk about on the films, like Coda was on my top 10, as Mel knows, but Coda is not a Max film. Like, it is everything. If I had to describe the antithesis of a Max film, it would be Coda.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Well, you've definitely piqued my interest.
It was on my top 10, so I'm not saying anything bad about it. The quote that I seem to recall from the top 10, I think that I used, famous quote to Casablanca from the writer of Casablanca, said that the Casablanca is cornier than Iowa, Nebraska put together, but when corn works, there's nothing like it. And that's sort of how I feel about Coda.
Okay, fair enough.
It's just enough magic to overcome all of the structural issues that we might have. If you do watch it, I'd be fascinated to know what you think. So
it's like,
I just feel like Mel likes her trigger warnings before our CMSs. I'm going to give you a trigger warning that it's like everything they tend not to like.
Fair enough. I
Yeah,
appreciate
Mel
it.
has to take my word for that.
Yeah, it's not doing anything new. But
Okay.
like something's wrong with you if you don't sob at the end of it.
Well, you found the person that's not going to sob.
Oh,
I don't
Oh my
no.
God, I'm a sobber. I'm a sobber.
Yeah, you won't sob.
It's really beautiful, but yeah, it's like it's cheesy. It's not doing anything new. It's predictable, you know.
Okay.
But,
I should warn you that when people set the bar that low, I often come in impressed.
Now
well,
it's gonna be.
and yeah, it's funny because you liked Little Miss Sunshine, which is interesting.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty great movie.
And I hate Little Miss Sunshine. So.
Yeah.
You hate Little Miss Sunshine?
I know, Mel. I know. Get ready.
Yeah, it's such a good script.
It is really, really not. It's really like two-dimensional characters. Like it's really not. But I digress. We've got another slide to show you guys. This is also a pretty popular one. This is going to be our composite all-time list. If you combine all the top 10s from all the years between the time we started the show in 2015 to 2021, that's 7 top 10 lists, the 10 highest point scorers that we've gotten over the course of the show. 2 films from 2021 join this list, knocking off Crip Camp from last year and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from 2019. As I've said, Phantom Thread and Dune are the only films ever to appear on all 3 lists. However, Silence sneaks into the second position by being my number 2 and Davies' number 1 of 2016, so it had a higher point total than Dune. Widows is the only one of my number 1 films to make this list. Only half the films on this list was number 1 on anyone's list. There's only 1 Best Picture winner on this list, 5 Best Picture nominees. I dislike 2 of the other films on this list. Silence, 1917, Creed, Widows, and Honey Boy were only seen by 2 of the 3 members on the panel, so theoretically they might have even been higher had everyone seen them. So this is our top 10 films of all time based on this same point value. Max, what do you think about this list? Probably seen some of these films.
I've seen a couple of them. Silence is the Scorsese film, right?
That's correct.
Interesting. I haven't actually seen it.
Mel, what do you think about this list here?
I have seen 5 of them, I believe. I've seen The Father, Honey Boy, Moonlight, 1917, and Dune. Like I didn't love Honey Boy and I didn't love Moonlight. Controversial, I know, but
Honey Boy did make my top 10, but when I said there's a film I didn't like on this list, it's Moonlight. I actually also dislike Moonlight.
Yeah, I had a lot of weird issues with Moonlight.
They're not weird. They're legit issues. And there's a lot not to like about Moonlight. I mean, it came around at the right place at the right time, but it's a real problematic film to me.
Yeah, and like Honey Boy, I think it had been, someone told me like it was so amazing. So when I went to see it, I was like, oh, I don't know. I had issues with that too. But I guess it's also one that's kind of jumping between time, right? Yeah. I find I often struggle with movies that kind of like jump around like that.
Honey Boy also made Alex's top 10 of the decade. That's how much he...
I like 1917. I remember really liking. And it's not even like really my kind of movie normally. But I thought it was like really, really captivating and impressive in all regards. And I loved The Father. Didn't you not like The Father?
Yeah, that's the other one on this list that I hate.
You hate. I really appreciate.
I think it's important to point that out because it's not like this is my top 10. You know what I mean? Like
right.
This isn't just about me. This is a group composite top 10. So there are films on this list that I don't admire, and that's okay because this is a group thing. I think there's value in looking at this, like as a little community, as a society, the No Name Cinema Society. If you put us all together, this is what we come up with. Anything else, Max?
Mel's thoughts are pretty interesting. I kind of don't agree about Moonlight. I thought it was fantastic. I definitely want to see 1917.
So here's the next little bit. I'm always talking about being a voter for the Independent Spirit Award. So I always, on this show every year, the first sound off of every season, I share with you what I voted for. I'll go through these very quickly. There you can see the Best International Film, the film that not many people saw, the documentary, of course, one that a lot of people talked about. And again, these are not my favorites of the year, but they're my favorites based on whatever category they were in. And I vote based on the nominations they give me. There are some performances in here that I would never have nominated on my own, but they were the best out of the 5. 3 of my votes actually won. Documentary for Summer of Soul won the Indie Spirit Award. Cinematography for Passing. Also for Passing, Ruth Negga won Best Supporting Actress. Just going through here, guys, these are my votes for the Independent Spirit Awards. Max, you probably didn't see much of these at all because of your 1986 commitment.
I didn't. Come On is something I really wanted to see. I did see Passing. I thought it was pretty great.
Passing did not make my top 10, but you can see I voted for it here in a couple categories. Ruth Negga was one of my top 5 supporting actresses of the year. Mel, you would know that Come On made my top 10.
Yes, I have not seen it. I haven't seen any of these actually.
Come on.
Come on.
That sort of takes us care of the top 10 films of 2021. And now, sort of feedback on the Oscar preview that we did that had Devin, myself, and Jim on it. We always like to go over how we did in terms of predictions. And historically, as far as I'm concerned, I was 8 for 9 in 2016, only missing Best Picture Moonlight because of the Moonlight La La Land thing. I had predicted La La Land incorrectly, so I could have been 9 for 9. For a second, I was 9 for 9. I was 9 for 9 in 2017, 5 for 9 in 2018, 7 for 9 in 2019, and my worst ever performance in 2020, 4 for 9 in 2020. And it was the only time in history someone else beat me in the predictions. As far as our main show is concerned, this year Jim went 5 for 9, and Devin and I agreed in the predictions on every category. So we were both 6 for 9 in this year's predictions. We all missed adapted screenplay, original screenplay, and best picture. We all missed that, and Jim also missed cinematography. Other than that, we got it right. In terms of the craft categories, I also did a lightning round of craft categories as I usually do. I was 5 out of 8 in 2020. This year, I was 7 out of 8. So not too bad in that regard. So a total of 13 out of 17 right. It's one under my record of getting 14 out of 17. So that is how we did in this year's Oscar predictions. Mel, I rebounded a little bit this year. Are you proud of me?
Yes.
I'm just so impressed with how many numbers you just said in a row. Such specific and clear relationship to things in life. But I just love that. It was a technical monologue that made total sense. And
it did make sense.
It made total sense. I was picturing what you were saying in a script, maybe. Thinking like, God, that would be so challenging to do what JB's doing. I'm on the wagon here.
It's about time you were on the wagon. Okay. Now it's time to move on to some questions related to our 1986 in review, Max.
Speaking of brilliant movies.
Mel, did you watch any of our 1986 in review?
No, I did not.
Before we start talking about films, every year in review that we do, I give a bunch of tidbits about things that were going on in the world in 1986, whether it's cultural, political, related to entertainment. And so the question that the audience wants to know, the fans want to know, out of all the things that I said, Max, what is the thing you remember most? The one little tidbit that you remember the most from the 1986 in review?
The audience wants to know that about me?
Yeah. What sticks out? You were there. We talked, I said a bunch of factoids, and what do you remember most out of all my little factoids?
You showed 2 videos. I'll be there for you in bad times, in sad times.
Me and Kelly.
You guys sang the top song of 1986.
Yeah, the number one song of 1986 was...
That's what Friends Were For, right? Yeah. That was fantastic.
Because our singing was fantastic, right? That was...
Well, yeah.
The number one song of the year is what you remember.
Yeah.
Very good. So that's that question. Fans love this question. So see how Max reacts to it. And I told him this was coming. So if he does not have an answer right away, it's going to be...
He's a terrible human being.
So the question is, the audience wants to know, who were the hottest man and woman you saw in movies from 1986? The hottest man. We'll start with man. So, Max, out of all the movies you saw in 1986, who was the hottest or best-looking man that you saw in a movie that year?
Best-looking man in a 1986 movie would have to be Bob Hoskins in Sweet Liberty. His energy, he was desperate to be this screenwriter. I thought it was kind of sexy.
You like the receding hairline thing?
That was good, too.
I thought you were going to go Mona Lisa, Bob Hoskins and Mona Lisa, but then I remembered you hadn't seen Mona Lisa.
I had not seen that. Yes. Thanks for rubbing that in.
Well, no. It wasn't about rubbing it in. I bet you think he'd be hotter in Mona Lisa.
That may totally be. I'm
going to go a more traditional route in the sense that now I feel like dirty almost, like I'm doing something inappropriate. But, in terms of like hottest guy, I have to admit, like Rob Lowe is pretty sexy in About Last Night, the movie based in the David Mamet play, Sexual Perversity in Chicago. It's almost distracting to the movie. He's so good looking in that movie. I don't think that's one you saw, or maybe you've seen it before and just not for this project.
I'm fascinated that you were distracted by his looks, though. That's kind of wild.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because he's so good looking, he doesn't feel like a real person sometimes to me. Mel, do you have any thoughts on Bob Hoskins or Rob Lowe as attractive people?
Oh, I'm just Googling them. It's hard, I feel like so much of attraction for me is like someone's energy. and like haven't seen these movies. So
Are you making a list of movies that you need to watch before next show?
sure, yeah.
Unconvincing.
Adding that now.
She's always saying I should bring her in to audition for things, and after that performance, I'm reconsidering. So Max, now we've done the men. Who was the hottest woman that you saw in a movie in 1986?
A Killing Affair, the woman in the lead?
Kathy Baker.
Kathy Bates. Yes.
Kathy Baker.
I'm sorry, Kathy Baker.
Different woman, Kathy Bates.
Yes,
Kathy
I
Baker,
understood after you corrected me.
You named her Best Actress of 1986.
Yeah.
You're attracted to her performance. And she's also in one of our 1988 films, Clean and Sober, and one of our 1990 films, Edward Scissorhands. She's had a really good career. I'm a dirty old man, so I went a lot younger. I went the absolute stunning Patsy Kensit in the musical Absolute Beginners. She's a British actress. She can sing. She can dance. Beautiful blonde woman. Oh, she's breathtaking, and she sings this sexually torch song at one point in the movie, and she dances acrobatically. Like, I was just like riveted just because of her. Patsy Kensit. She later went on to do Lethal Weapon 2 and some other films in America, but she's really breathtaking. The next thing I think Max is really going to enjoy, because we didn't talk about this in the 1986 review, but I'm pretty sure he has some strong feelings. Max, what was the worst film of 1986 that you saw?
The worst film of 1986, I mean, it's really hard not to have ties for that one, because there were so many.
And out of like only 32, I think you watched.
Well, yeah, exactly. Really good point.
Imagine watching 101 is what I'm saying.
Oh, man. I think you do have different worlds that the worst film exists in. Like, there was the big budget worst, and then there was maybe the independent oriented worst.
So I mean, like, you do the grading. How would you qualify? What is the worst?
The school like mishap gang member movie 310 to Yuma. No,
315 The Moment of Truth.
315 The Moment of Truth. Thank you. That probably will take the prize in my mind. And it had some wonderful moments. I mean, don't get me wrong. It definitely falls into a so bad it's good category. Whereas a movie that doesn't necessarily do
he's
that.
going to sneak in his backup. All right, go ahead.
I would say is Raw Deal, which I actually think is a porno film without sex.
That's not my worst movie, but I can tell you, like, that Raw Deal is a very, very bad movie. We can agree.
There were scenes that were edited that it was like conversation that was jump cut. And you have these strong character actors supporting Arnold, and he would show up with all this charisma, and it would be like the sex scene.
Darren McGavin's in this movie. My notes say that it's the kind of movie that likely inspired Michael Bay. Mindless, senseless, excessive, chaotic action with a severe lack of interest in storytelling. It's pretty bad. It seems we're simpatico on that one.
These are movies I'm not writing down to side.
Okay, well, it's time for my worst movie of the year, and I don't think that my friend Max saw this one, although he likes one of the actors in it, I believe. For the second year in a row, my worst film of the classic year we studied is a one-word title that begins with the letter M. Last year, it was Madrone from 1970. This year, it's a film called Miracles, starring Tom Conti and Terry Garr. Like the film The Nice Guys that we reviewed way back in episode 28.1, I believe, it wants to explore luck, coincidence, fate, and as the title suggests, miracles. And like The Nice Guys, the fact that the film is self-aware and leans into its contrivances doesn't make me enjoy it anymore. Couple that with the incessant bickering of Terry Garr and Tom Conti, and this movie becomes borderline unbearable. Now, don't get me wrong, I love me some Terry Garr, but this material is significantly beneath her. I never understood the Tom Conti thing. I don't think he's charismatic, interesting, or thorough in terms of creating character. I've never seen a film I've liked him in, except Max liked him because he named him as the best actor of 1986 for a film. Actually, I don't remember the name of it, Max.
Yes, Saving Grace.
I've not seen that one, but I've not seen a Tom Conti performance I've liked, so maybe Saving Grace will be it. Even though the film was about miracles, I'm not sure what the take-home point is. Was it some sort of fatalistic or even religious suggestion to trust that the universe will provide us or point us in the right direction? Because even in the smartest hands, that seems naive. And it's certainly never really as funny or cute as I think it wants to be. As you guys know, I love watching movies generally, but this one really tested my patience. Mel, Miracles.
Never seen it. Probably never will after that.
Max.
I missed that one. It was a miracle that I missed it.
Now, we do this every year as well, and this is going to be more me just letting the audience know about some history related to this particular show. We call this the Repeat Offenders segment because this is the 7th year that we've studied. Obviously, we studied 1990, 1966, 1942, 1959, 1970, 1988, and 1986. So out of all those 7 years, 2 directors have directed films in 5 of the 7 years we've studied, which we thought was noteworthy. 1 director has directed films in 6 of the 7 years that we studied, and 2 actors have appeared in films in 6 of the 7 years that we've studied. So I just want to call out and acknowledge those actors and directors, what is obviously a career of longevity and impressiveness. First, I'm going to start with director Blake Edwards. In 1959, he directed the film Operation Petticoat, the 3rd highest grossing film of 1959. In 1966, he directed a film called What Did You Do in the War, Daddy?, which is what Jay Money said was the best film of 1966. In 1970, he directed a film called Darling Lily with his wife, Julie Andrews, and that was the film that I said I wanted to remake from 1970, and Max was on the show where we recast Darling Lily. In 1988, he directed a film called Sunset, which won him the Razzie for Worst Director of 1988, which is unfair. I thought actually wasn't a good film, but it wasn't that bad of a film. And for 1986, I don't know if Max saw this movie, he directed a film called That's Life, again with his wife Julie Andrews and with Jack Lemmon.
I missed that. I love Blake Edwards though.
And so another director that's directed in films from 5 of the 6 years that we studied is Mike Nichols, who made his directorial debut in 1966 with the film Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which we all on that show said he should have won the Best Director Oscar for that film. In 1970, he directed the film Catch-22. He had 2 films in 1988, Working Girl, which was an Oscar nominee for Best Picture, and Biloxi Blues. In 1990, he directed the film Postcards from the Edge, which I said he should have been nominated for Best Director for that one. And for 1986, he directed the film Heartburn, also with Meryl Streep, and that was the performance that I said should have won Best Actress from 1986. I don't think you watched Heartburn either, even though it was Mike Nichols.
I didn't, but Mike Nichols is mind-blowing.
And so the final director, this director has actually directed films from 6 different years that we've studied, and we don't talk about him a lot as a major filmmaker, but you look at this body of work, and it's pretty impressive. So I'm going to go over it right now. I'm talking about Sidney Lumet, who directed a film in 1959 called The Fugitive Kind, which I said should have won for Best Actor for Marlon Brando and Best Supporting Actress for Joanne Woodward. It's based on a Tennessee Williams piece called Orpheus Descending. In 1966, he directed a film called The Group, which we went to see again at this year's TCM Fest in April. In 1970, he directed a film called The Last of the Mobile Hotshots, which, like The Fugitive Kind, is based on a Tennessee Williams play. In 1988, he directed the film Running on Empty, for which Devin said he should have won Best Director. In 1990, he directed the film Q&A, starring Nick Nolte and Armand Assante. And in 1986, he actually had 2 films. The film Power with Richard Gere and Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington, and the film The Morning After, which Max did watch. And it's the film that Kelly wanted to remake, and we will recast that on the next Sound Off. Max, Sidney Lumet.
I mean, another genius. All the directors you just mentioned are phenomenal. Sidney Lumet is no exception. And The Morning After, probably not the strongest film I think he's ever made, but it was really good.
Well, I will say the other film from 1986 that I don't think you see is called Power. I'm not going to talk about it when we do our top 5, but it did make my top 10 films from 1986. I think Power is more in the Sidney Lumet vein, and I think you might admire it, political thriller kind of thing. Actors, 2 actors have been in 6 different, 6 of the 7 years that we've studied. And so I'm going to start with Sean Connery, who made his film debut in 1959 in the film Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And in 1966, he was in a film called A Fine Madness. In 1970, he was in a film called The Molly Maguires. In 1988, he was in a film called The Presidio. In 1990, he was in 2 films, The Hunt for Red October, of course, and The Russia House. And in 1986 film, you remember a film Sean Connery's in 1986, Max?
I didn't see it.
Pretty sure you've heard of it or seen it before as a kid. Highlander. Sean Connery, of course, is in Highlander.
That's right.
Which is in films from 1986. And the final actor I want to talk about is Swedish actor Max von Sydow, who played a gas station attendant in the film Wild Strawberries in 1959. Small role, but it still counts. In 1966, he was in George Roy Hill's film Hawaii, and I actually named Max von Sydow as the best actor of 1966 for that performance. In 1970, he was reunited with Bergman for the film The Passion of Anna. In 1988, Alex said he should have won the Best Actor Oscar for Pele the Conqueror. In 1990, he was in the film Awakenings in an uncredited performance. And in 1986, Max, he was in which film?
Hannah and her sister's just mind blowing because I didn't expect him. He is so different in that movie.
Sean Connery and Max von Sydow are the two actors that have now appeared in 6 of the 7 years we've studied, which is kind of impressive to me. I don't know if it's impressive to you guys. So I just want to take a moment to cheers to the memories. They're all past now. So Blake Edwards, Sidney Lumet, Mike Nichols, Sean Connery, and Max von Sydow. Cheers to you guys. And, great work. And if only we could get half of those careers, I think we'd be pretty happy. Mel, anything on any of those actors or directors or those films that we talked about? Anything you've seen?
I have not seen barely any of those things, so I'm overwhelmed by the amount of movies I need to see.
So we've covered all your questions about the top 10 films of 2021, our Oscar preview, and the 1986 in review. So now it's time to move to our final segment of the evening. Mel, do you know what it is?
I do not.
Max, do you know what's coming next?
The best of countdown.
He's close. I don't know why he doesn't know what to call it, but it's the top 5 films
Top
of
five.
1986. It's JB's top 5, and the first sound of every year, we go over the top 5 films of the year we just studied. 86 in review itself was focused on the Oscar categories, but now we're going to count down our 5 favorite films from that year, and I've got my Top Gun shirt here to sort of to commemorate the top 5 of 1986. But spoiler alert, Max, Top Gun will not make my top 5. Sorry, Mel. I know how big fan you and your husband are. Normally it's a JB top 5, but because Max watched all those films, he's going to join me. And though those of you that watch the show might know our number 1 and maybe number 2, but the others are still worthwhile. And Mel didn't watch the show, so she has no idea what films we're going to talk about here. We start, of course, with number 5. Max, what is your number 5 favorite film of 1986?
Number 5 favorite film is The Color of Money. It's really good.
And we watched it together. I did not enjoy it when you touched my knee. It was only twice, so
Oh, yeah.
you misread
Sorry
that.
about that, JB.
Yeah, you misread the room. Because we are who we are. I'm going to disagree. Like Martin Scorsese, of course, is a master filmmaker, but this movie itself never really quite gelled for me. It'd be lazy for me to say it pales in comparison to its predecessor. It never really feels to me like this Fast Eddie is the grown-up version of the Eddie we met 25 years earlier. The Hustler is a masterpiece. The Color of Money is not. And honestly, one of the big bumps for me is Tom Cruise. I think Tom Cruise is really weak. I think they needed a stronger actor in that performance. And interestingly enough, it was CAA that made sure that Tom Cruise got in this movie. I also think the film lacks the layers of The Hustler, which is surprising to me because there's so many smart people involved with The Color of Money. To me, this film is just about male ego, and in the end, that is more precious than money. Not that the film agrees or condones with that. It's just more of a sad and frustrating acknowledgement of masculinity's primary motivation. Scorsese's infusion of style seems out of place often, distracting and unmotivated, a lot like Tom Cruise, quite frankly. And, I know Paul Newman won an Oscar, and none of us said that he deserved it, but to me, he's going through the motions. For a performance, it's an Oscar-winning performance. It feels very unnecessarily casual. I feel like it hinges on a certain amount of desperation that rears its head, like it was latent for all those years and it comes back up, and that's the whole point. And I don't feel that from his performance. I feel like the premise itself wasn't as interesting as I wanted it to be. I guess it felt too familiar too often. Like you've seen the old guy and the young loose cannon dynamic before, and Scorsese and team hardly make it feel new again or interesting enough to me. It's not a terrible movie and has some cool pool shots, but even those were sometimes overly flashy, which bumped for me. Pool porn. It's lesser Scorsese for sure, and I'm not sure it needed to be. Do you disagree with anything specifically that you wanted to mention, or are you okay to move on?
I'm eager to hear your number 5.
Okay, cool. Before I do that, I want to see if Mel has anything she wants to say about The Color of Money.
Never seen it.
All right. It's time for my number 5. For as much as I had some issues with Max's number 5, I can tell you for damn sure he is not going to like my number 5 because it came up on the show. But I will say whenever I show friends the list of films of 1986, this is the one that they invariably pick out and say, oh my God, I love this movie. In that sense, it might also be a Mel movie. And maybe she's seen it, probably not. But yeah, Max pointed out on the show that he did not enjoy this movie. Interestingly, last year when we did our top 5 films of 1970, my number 5 was a film called I Never Sang with My Father, which starred Gene Hackman. So once again, here I am with my number 5 film from 1986, also being a film starring Gene Hackman, also a sports movie like The Color of Money, one of the greatest sports movies ever made in my mind. Hoosiers is my number 5 film from 1986 from director David Onspach. There aren't too many films that can lift my spirit and soul in quite the same way. And where Max and I disagree, I think, is I don't find anything disingenuous about it. It balances game drama with naturalistic human drama. A story about many different kinds of redemption, and also about the power of sport to bring people together or drive them apart, whether that's teammates or community. think it's some great writing, performances, and some solidly delicate direction. If I were a one-man nominating committee, I would give it 6 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Dennis Hopper, which it did get, Best Original Screenplay, Best Editing, Best Score, and Best Sound. I wouldn't have it win in any of those categories, but I would have it nominated in each of those categories. I'll give Max the floor now. I know you're not too comfortable with Hoosiers.
I didn't rewatch it. I just remember thinking it wasn't very impressive. I didn't necessarily walk away feeling like it was a terrible movie. It had an element of contrivance and wasn't
It's got
what
a
it could have been.
Coda-style cheese to it. Like, I acknowledge that.
I will say Gene Hackman is one of my favorite actors. I don't think I've ever seen him turn in a bad performance.
And if you remember, maybe you don't, but Kelly did name him as the best actor of 1986 for this movie.
Sure. And what Kelly says goes.
That's not what I meant. Mel, did I ever ask you if you've seen it?
I haven't.
Is it going on the list?
Sure.
Cool. Let's move on to number 4. Max, what's your number 4 favorite film of 1986?
Number 4, A Killing Affair.
It's one I didn't see, so there's no rebuttal.
I just thought it was a little gem, and it was disturbing, and it was sincere, wonderful characters. Yeah, I just recommend it.
I haven't seen it, so there's 0.05% chance that Mel has seen this movie.
I have not.
It seems like a movie I need to watch at this point. This is multiple times it's come up today and also on the show. And also you named Kathy Baker as Best Actress of 1986 and the hottest woman of 1986.
Go, Kathy!
All right, so it's time for my number 4. And this next film didn't come up at all in our 1986 interviews, strangely enough. But it has come up in conversation with Kelly. And whenever it comes up, she basically throws up in her mouth because she hated it so much. But I will say, I think Max might agree with me on this one. It's a film based on a book which has recently been readapted into a show on Apple TV. The film's director, Peter Weir, is an outstanding, reliable filmmaker who delivers the goods once again in the borderline brilliant Mosquito Coast.
Oh.
It's a complex, challenging, cerebral film. I was fascinated, though not quite emotionally invested. Great frames, great balance between close-ups and wides, with shot design that was detailed, but also never really called attention to itself. And let me tell you, Harrison Ford truly gives the performance of his career, I think. His passion for his vision is palpable, and his descent into madness is subtle and earned. At first glance, it seems like a reminder of the impossibility of utopia, but it seems that there's much more than that. There's something about human ingenuity and the power of the dreamers. But there's also the flip side of that. When the dream becomes obsession, it becomes dangerous. So once again, the word balance comes to mind. It's easy to become disgusted with the commercialization, greed, and laziness of modern society. But living without doesn't really solve anything. Maybe it alleviates our own guilt from contributing to the problem. You're decreasing your carbon footprint and avoiding the callousness of the world. But Ali's same genius could be used to help solve the greater issues. And so there's also perhaps something about the burden of genius. Maybe sometimes it's too great a burden for the mind to hold. If you know so much, you feel invincible and then imperious. It's hard to play well with others who just can't understand. All that is part of a rich novel, which became a rich film that leaves so much for dissection and discussion. If I were a one-man nominating committee, I would give it 2 nominations, Best Picture and Best Actor for Harrison Ford. It wouldn't win in any of those categories, but it would get nominated. I'm surprised Kelly doesn't like it so much. I think it's a wonderful, impressive film. And Max, I think you didn't rewatch it, but you have some good experience with it historically.
Good memory on that. I didn't rewatch it. I loved it as a youngster. And Peter Weir is one of my favorite directors.
Outstanding. Time and time again. And he's like in that Sidney Lumet camp, as nobody like talks about him the way they talk about Scorsese with that same sort of reverence, but great film after great film.
Yeah.
And that's why, I have Mosquito Coast that high up. I think it's outstanding.
100%.
Mel, have you seen the 1986 film or current TV show with Justin Theroux?
No, I have not.
Time for our number 3 film of 1986.
Oh, yes. Number 3, Hannah and Her Sisters.
That's another one we saw. We watched it together, I think, didn't we?
Well, I believe so. He's such a kind of a
Persona non grata.
Persona non grata. And I get it. Appreciate that. But you look at this movie and it's so nuanced and multi-layered and interweaving like a symphony. And they're all so rich. I don't know. I just thought it was really fantastic.
That's a movie that came up a lot. I named Woody Allen should have won Best Director. I think I said it should have won Best Picture, but I didn't love all the nominees. It's not a top 10 movie for me, but it'd be top 15. I admire the film quite a bit. I don't have the passion for it that I do some of his other works like Annie Hall. I think Henry Sisters, though, is wholly relatable, and the scene work. And I talked about this when I named him or I said he should have won the Oscar for Best Director. The scene work is outstanding. The way the camera moves fluidly, almost surreptitiously through spaces, in concert with the way the actors move naturally, and it finds frames without forcing them. It's a wonder to behold in terms of the art of film direction, like the skill, the craft of film direction. Screenplay-wise, though, the voiceover is one of the things that bumps for me. Mel knows all too well how I feel about voiceover. There's some great performances like Diane Wiest, but there's some not so great performances for me. I'm not a Barbara Hershey fan. I also think Michael Caine, who won an Oscar, I don't think he's very good in this movie for me. I don't sense as much of a complete character from him that I do from Diane Wiest or Max von Sydow. Even in lesser screen time, Max von Sydow seems more fully realized. There are times when it doesn't trust its audience. I still think it's quite an accomplishment, and the result is a tapestry of angst, doubt, fear, love, death, sex, all the things that made up modern life and relationships in the 80s. So it's all encompassing. It's impressive. It's deep. It's smart and funny. There's a lot of things that you want a movie to be. There's some little bumps along the way that push it further and further down the list. It's not so much an argument, just sort of reaction.
One thing you just said that is really interesting, I think, is you said these elements that the film deals with that are so important to modern life in the 80s. One of the unique things about this film, so many 1986 movies could not escape the 80s. And some made fun of it, like Ruthless People, I thought escaped the 80s by diving headfirst into the 80s. Hannah and Her Sisters, I don't think is locked in by the year, by the decade. I mean, I'm not quite saying it's timeless per se, but it escaped so many things that 1986 movies could not escape.
I don't want to answer it now because it's a bigger question, but how much can you escape the era in which you're making a movie? It's a very difficult thing to do because you don't have the foresight. You're just trying to make the best movie you can with this material that you have.
Well,
but,
it's hard to, I don't necessarily think it's something you plan on. Right.
I figure it's a difficult thing to do to get it out of, like you only know what you know kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So Mel, that's what we're saying about Hannah and Her Sisters.
I think I will eventually watch Woody Allen movies. I do.
My number 3 film came up on the show when we discussed my choice for Best Director of the Year. And let's see if Max remembers who I chose for Best Director of 1986.
JB, gosh, you chose. Was it John Hughes?
No, I chose the Italian maestro Federico Fellini for his work on the film Ginger and Fred. As I said then, the fact that Fellini made an amazing film is less of a surprise than how it's not as discussed as his 60s masterpieces. Admittedly, Ginger and Fred is not at that level, but it's still pretty extraordinary. A staggering return to form for a filmmaker that had been all but dismissed by this point in his career. By turning his satirical lens to television, he found the perfect venue for his circus and procession metaphors that he included in most of his films in almost a Pavlovian way. Except here they are less existential and more about pop culture, specifically how advertising, marketing, and manipulation are the drivers behind popular entertainment. The unholy alliance between art and commerce that we talk about sometimes on the show, especially on shows that Max is a part of. As much as it is an opus for a more sophisticated art, there's also a love of the artist at the root of the film that adds this warm enjoyment in addition to all the great filmmaking. I love this film, and it was my big surprise of the project. If I were a one-man nominating committee, I would give it 4 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Production Design, and Best Costume Design. And I would have it win for both Best Director and Best Costume Design. I've got Ginger and Fred. I know Max didn't see it. There's no way Mel's seen this movie.
I have not, and I thought that I'd seen a Fellini movie, but I'm looking through and maybe I haven't.
You're 0 for Fellini?
I thought I had seen no, I don't think I have.
Moving right along, and it's number 2, so I don't think Max is going to guess mine, but I bet you I can guess Max's number 2.
Okay.
And I'm going to say Room with the View.
That was on the show, right?
We talked about it should have won Best Picture, but...
Yes, it's funny. For today's episode, I allowed myself to rethink things just slightly.
You're not the first to do that, so I got it wrong. I guess wrong.
I'm going to go with Blue Velvet for number 2.
We talked about it ad nauseum on the show. Blue Velvet, tell me why.
It's just a mesmerizing piece. It allows itself to go far astray from where you think it will, and it does it with such kind of a grounded sense of storytelling. I go in every left and right, up and down, direction that the story takes me. And I think that the directing is beautiful. The uncharacteristic stylized aspects, I think, work really well. So many of the performances are exciting and different. There's something very theatrical about the film, and yet it also adheres to cinema so well.
You look back at the show, it seems like we disagreed upon it, but I mean, it's my number 7 film of 1986. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan, but I think we disagreed because I didn't name it in any of the categories. And also, I feel like I was constantly explaining why I just missed not putting Blue Velvet in each of these categories, or, what just kept it off. So, I was, instead of talking about how great it was, which I could have done, I find Mulholland Drive like slightly more evocative. The Blue Velvet is just as deeply cinematic and meaningful. To me, it's about the thin line between dreams and nightmares. Some have argued that it's about the fallacy of human decency, but I would argue it more suggests that decency is more of a half-truth, not the whole story. A lot of people think about Blue Velvet, talk about America's lost innocence, but Lynch seems to almost suggest it was never really there. This dark America is buried under Norman Rockwell-esque propaganda. What's most telling to me about Blue Velvet is the way the darkness seems to call to us. It's like morbidly fascinating and appeals to impulses within ourselves that we can't explain. For every Emerald City, for example, there's a dark evil to the west right behind it. I can't explain all the details of Blue Velvet. I don't know that Max can, but that's sort of the beauty of it, the mystery within the mystery. But I can tell you, to me, it's about the duplicity of human nature, the good and evil within all of us that we have to embrace, understand, and reconcile rather than suppress. And once again, the word I use is balance. I think Blue Velvet is gorgeous and detailed with a sparse use of the mise-en-scène, but in such a way that calls attention to itself. The frames are full and stirring. Hard to evaluate the script for me. It's really just a series of visual ideas and metaphors. The story of Blue Velvet is almost irrelevant because of its allegorical nature. It doesn't have the emotional impact as some of the other work, but it's a truly great work and a full and complete vision, and one of the most truly cinematic films of 1986. So it's not really a rebuttal, Max.
I disagree with everything you said.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Just kidding.
This is a film schooly kind of film, so it's possible that someone made Mel watch Blue Velvet at some point.
I've seen the opening sequence in a class, but I've actually never seen the movie. The only David Lynch thing I've watched is Twin Peaks. I mean, the way I felt about Twin Peaks sounds similar to a lot of things you said about Blue Velvet.
I would argue Twin Peaks is a little more accessible.
I think Twin Peaks is amazing. I am ashamed that I haven't actually seen the full, is it 2 seasons?
I would argue that the first season of Twin Peaks might be the best full season of a television show of all time.
It's
incredible.
David Lynch is like not my vibe. It's creepy, creeps me out. So I don't like that kind of like tone in terms of just my own taste.
Those things that you're talking about, like maybe we're putting different values on them, but that's why he's 7 instead of top 5. You know what I mean? Like those are the little things that I'm like, I appreciate this masterwork. It doesn't hit me in the same way that Hoosiers does, for example, and I have a lot of value for something that's a well-told story that hits me here,
Yeah, I feel like he like unravels like a lot of stuff and never ties it back together. But
he's not trying to. It's not a narrative film. I just feel like it needs to be judged on its own terms.
Yeah,
and we don't ascribe our screenwriting structure thing to it. Like, you wouldn't get an A in your screenwriting class.
No, but everyone would be very intimidated by him.
But he's not a narrative filmmaker, and I respect that. It's not what I do. I could never make Blue Velvet. I tried to guess your number 2 poorly. Do you want to try and guess my? I don't think you'll get it. Do you want to try and guess my number 2 poorly, or should I just do it?
It's not Heartburn, is it?
It is not. You did guess my number 2 poorly. You didn't get it. My number 2 is a film that I loaned Max the DVD for, and he still hasn't watched.
Oh,
now he knows it.
I see. Woman Hunter.
Manhunter. The first and best of the films featuring the Hannibal Lecter character, played in this iteration by Succession's Brian Cox. Director Michael Mann takes this potboiler with a serial killer and turns it into a riveting character drama with a mystery on the side. I was impressed with how skillfully the script dealt with all the exposition, giving you the information without ever stopping or forcing it. Michael Mann's film honors the process of police work. It's the uber procedural, but much better than the hackneyed, overly structured TV shows. In the character of Will Graham, Michael Mann reminds us of the sacrifices made by those who protect us, which could extend to military personnel as well in times of war. For all of the abuses of some of these authority figures, others of them make quite a lot of sacrifices, not only in their personal lives, but to their well-being, both physically and mentally. This flows in the undercurrent of Manhunter without ever losing its narrative thrust. It's a truly excellent film. In fact, the whole film to me is far better than its more famous companion, The Silence of the Lambs. There's so little wrong with it. Great character work, great drama, great mystery, always intelligent, interesting, and cinematic. Not to mention the haunting 80s synth score. The film nerds out there would back me up on this one. If I were a one-man nominating committee, we get 7 nominations, which is the most out of any film. We get Best Picture nomination, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Tom Noonan, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Score. I would have it win in one of those categories, and that's Best Adapted Screenplay. It came in second place for me in a lot of the categories, including Best Picture, of course. So Manhunter is my number 2 film of 1986. We know Max didn't watch it, but maybe one day before I get that DVD back.
Right.
Mel, I'm sure you know the director, Michael Mann, but have you seen Manhunter?
I have not. I think Brian Cox is amazing, but...
So now I'm going to re-guess Max's number 1. It's time for number 1s, and now that he's eliminated Blue Velvet, I had Blue Velvet. I assumed Blue Velvet was going to be number 1, and he's totally allowed to switch it. So whatever I guess for number 2, I'm now going to guess my number 1 film is from the company that I worked for between 1996 and 1998. Max, is Room with the View your number 1 film of 1986?
You know, what's interesting is I thought that movie was so well done. It's not my number 1.
Got it wrong again. You did a good job of red herring me. Like I thought for sure those are your top 2, and Room with the View is off the list altogether.
What I did with this list is I thought back and I thought, you know, there's an element that I left out originally, which was just sort of sitting back and enjoying a movie, letting it surprise you, and it was just so enjoyable. I'm going to make it number 1, Sweet Liberty.
From director Alan Alda.
Sweet Liberty is a movie about making a movie. It's totally surprising because I didn't know that Alan Alda was a director. This just brought so many power players together in terms of talent. You've got all these amazing actors. The script was tight. It was funny. I just thought it was wonderful. In many ways, I think A Room with a View was probably better filmmaking, you know, better art. But this just was so much fun, and it was such a surprise. Yeah.
Well, and you surprised us in the audience because I thought I knew what your top 2 films were, and you threw me a curveball, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed, really. I should know you better. I was engaged and interested all the way through until all of a sudden it was over, and I felt like very little happened. It feels like a little bit of residual anger on Alda's behalf towards Hollywood, the film industry, and the various personalities that populate it. I found it ultimately unfulfilled. I was interested in both the Revolutionary War and the film industry and the conflicts it suggested. I just felt like it never really delivered on that promise for me. I felt like it was constantly building and never paid off. Middle of the road kind of film. I don't have the disdain for it that I do for so many other films, but I was disappointed ultimately. But to your point, I was engaged. I felt like this empty feeling afterwards because it didn't deliver on that.
I mean, I think that was one of the themes, was this emptiness. You know, you see Michael Caine kind of deliver this really interesting monologue about Winston Churchill, and then you don't really know if that's true. And then the whole thing about reality and sort of what's made up. I'm not entirely sure that experience that you were left with was not a little bit intended.
If that's so, it doesn't make me like it more, like that they intended me to feel that way about it. There's no chance Mel's seen Sweet Liberty.
I have not.
My number 1 film of 1986, and it's come up before. I think everybody knows what this is going to be, so I'm going to let Max tell the audience what my number 1 film is.
Your number 1 film of 1986 is Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Obviously, if you've watched the show, that you know that Max and I really got into it about Ferris Bueller's Day Off on that show, so we won't rehash that here, I don't think. Very frequently on the show, I explain that the films that combine entertainment value and depth are the ones I appreciate the most. That, to me, is the goal. And to that end, Ferris Bueller's Day Off from director John Hughes does that as well as any film from 1986. It's light and silly in places, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value and depth in its ability to capture the spirit, attitudes, and anxieties of a generation. I see it as a perfectly executed fable about joie de vivre in an irresistible, entertaining package. From a directing point of view, it's John Hughes' most complete, well-realized film. There are so many details strewn throughout every frame. You always feel like he has complete control in a smart, insightful way. The tight editing is a huge help in getting the most out of all the storylines. Look no further than the museum sequence to see a filmmaker who has learned his craft. The script is delightful and inspired, not to mention one of the genuinely funnier films of the year. But it's also ambitious, and realizing it in the execution is quite impressive. The ensemble does a terrific job of bringing them to life, finding their own hooks into these people and adding dimension. There are no bumps in the cast for me. Everyone understands the tone and tenor of the piece and thrives within those parameters, which to me is another sign of great direction. I always knew I liked the film quite a bit, but I think I respect it even more after this project as a legitimate work in spite of it being a light comedy. If I were a one-man nominating committee, it would get 4 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Editing, winning only Best Picture. You know how Max feels about it. I'll give him another chance. But out of all the films we've talked about today, it seems like the one that Mel might have seen the most. Mel.
I have seen this. Yeah. It's actually one of Brady's, if not his, favorite movie. I mean, I've only seen it once. It's not a movie I grew up with either. And I didn't dislike it, but I didn't love it. I don't know. I didn't connect to it. I'm not sure why. It's not one of those movies that you're like in, you know, because it's like got this kind of narrated feel and maybe that's part of it. But I think it's also, it's a very emotional, sentimental movie for a lot of people. And I don't seem to have that connection. So
I think there's more than that. I think if you look at it a little closer, like I think it displays in an amusing way what's going on with the American teenager, you know, at this point in time in history, and Ferris's, you know, sort of worldview about work-life balance. I think that has resonance for a lot of different age groups.
I mean, I'm not American. I didn't grow up in the States, and I wonder if that too affected. I think I owe it a rewatch though.
Max, I know we talked about this a lot, and I know you have some strong feelings about it. Is there more you want to say?
Batter up, baby.
Yeah.
I would have just left it there, but I had a really interesting opportunity because I didn't rewatch it for the show, for the 1986 in review, but I did just rewatch it a week and a half ago, maybe. This was a very important film to me back in 1986. The funny thing is that on rewatching it, I didn't necessarily think it was a bad movie, but it was so boring. I have some theories that in the screenplay, it's such an episodic structure. He wakes up and his only intent is to not go to school. You know, he doesn't actually have a plan. You know, what would have helped me is if there was something that he had an obstacle against that wasn't just getting out of school.
I have an immediate counterpoint to that because I feel like this feeds into the theme because it's not just getting out of school, it was experiencing life. You know, like, and I know that sounds like broad, but I mean, like, it was an escape sorts to like live. And so there was elements of a plan. Like there was a plan on how to fake the illness. There was a plan on how to get the car. They weren't sure what they were going to do that day, but they knew they were going to do something, which I think speaks to the theme of getting out there, you know what I mean? Like, and getting out of
totally
the rut,
agree.
of the routine. That's why I think that structure is the way it is.
It felt fortuitous to me, though, especially like sort of culminating in the parade scene where he grabs the microphone. Not that it wasn't exciting to watch again, and that, you know, a lot of what you said I think still holds up. It didn't grip me.
For me, the tension is outside of Ferris. Like, and I always argue that Ferris is not the protagonist of this movie. Like if you look at the arcs, it's really all those around him. Cameron and his sister specifically. Ferris is really just like the vehicle for the arcs of those characters, and that to me is interesting from a screenwriting point of view as well. Almost, I don't want to say experimental. That seems grandiose term in that sense, but unique. We can dig into this for a while, but obviously I disagree. You know, rewatching it again for me was so joyful, like to the point like I had tears. You know, like Mel makes fun of me for all the times I cry in movies, but this was another one, and it was tears of joy, being reminded how important it is to get out there and do things, and like because we forget, because we get stuck in our daily rut and needing to make money and needing to like do what we're supposed to be doing, and sometimes, you know, we're not experiencing things. But that's what Ferris Bueller means to me, and it seems intentional.
I agree.
So my question then for you is, you know, you're just like the receptacle today. So what, you know, out of all the movies we watched, we discussed, what is the one that you're gonna go back and you're gonna watch right as soon as possible?
I think I should probably watch Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet. So Max, you win.
I win. This is not a contest.
No, I'm just
okay.
kidding.
All right.
I thought I had influence over her after The Apartment and all those other movies I recommended, but no, it's Max that has the
also,
final.
though, like I should see a Fellini movie. That's pretty bad.
Well, I wouldn't start with Ginger and Fred, but if you know Fellini well enough, that you'd be more impressed with Ginger and Fred. All right, it's time for evening summary, everybody, which is, you know, just final closing thoughts. Mel, heard a lot of things. How do you feel about your first sound off?
Very informative. I feel I've taken in a lot of information.
I expect a 2-page essay, you know, turned into my desk tomorrow. telling me all that you learned. Max, how do you feel about tonight?
I feel tonight is a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful place to be tonight. Wherever you are, hug yourself.
All
and
right.
if you're a one-man voting committee, then find another human being to vote with and stop being alone.
All right, kids, say goodbye to the audience. They're
Bye.
waving.
Bye, audience.
Their vocal goodbyes. Excellent. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.